Trick or treat, trick or treat, trick or treat for Halloween. Ooh, that is strong. Hello and welcome to Pink Paradox Reads. I'm Lisa Kruger, aka Pink Paradox, and I read books, I watch horror movies, and I unbox things that has to do with books and horror movies. If you are watching this on the day of its release, then happy Halloween! Halloween is not widely celebrated here in Norway, but I do like to put up some spooky decor, get some nice food and drink, and watch a bunch of scary movies. That doesn't really sound that much different from the rest of the year to me. Because I love all things scary and spooky and horror. And in this video, I'll be doing a tag that I've been meaning to do ever since I started this channel, really, the Horror Life tag. And this is a tag that many of the YouTubers that I follow have done already, including Out of the Box, Jason's Weird Reads, and Elizabeth Sagewood. And I will link all of their videos in the video description, as well as Marie McWilliams, who created the tag. This tag really explores our relationship with the horror genre and how it's affected us throughout our life. So let's get started with question number 1, which is, what was the first horror movie you remember seeing? And my honest answer to that question is I can't remember. I was an anxious child who grew up to become an anxious adult. And I didn't really seek out scary things when I was little. I had a school friend, whose dad owned a video store, and he had access to pretty much anything you'd ever want to watch on video when you were a kid. And I remember all our friends at school would flock to him to see what was, out there in terms of scary movies, popular movies, anything really. But I was never really drawn to the really scary stuff because, like I said, I just had a real anxious side, and I guess I kind of knew that it just wasn't good for me. I just know I'm gonna spill whiskey everywhere. I do, however, remember the first movie that I watched that absolutely terrified me, but that I could not look away from, and that was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, directed by Steven Spielberg. And I must have been maybe like 6 or 7 years old when I saw this. It would have been at my grandmother's house because there were a bunch of cousins there. Might have been during the holidays, and somebody, I'm guessing my uncle, had rented that movie thinking that it would be okay for a bunch of kids below 13 years old to watch it. But if you have seen Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, you know that it is absolutely packed with scary stuff. It starts out great enough. There's like a fun musical number and like a car chase scene and a little kid driving a car. I think that's how they sold it to me. Like, oh yeah, no, it's no big deal. It's fun. It's like there's a kid driving a car, blah, blah, blah. But, then it's like masses and masses of bugs. There's a banquet scene where they're eating like stuffed snake and chilled monkey brain. And that's just to start with. Then you have like human sacrifice, and like a guy gets plummeted into a pit of fire, and one guy has his heart ripped out straight from his chest. And I was watching all of this stuff and I was riveted. I could not look away. I was just petrified, in fear, but still also really entertained. So yeah, I can't remember the first horror movie I ever watched, but the first movie that showed me that really scary things could be really entertaining, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Next question is, what was the first horror book you remember reading? And this is a bit of a cop-out again. The first sort of horror book that I remember reading was Vampire Master by Virginia Ironside. Not this copy, this is the original English. Mine was in Norwegian, and I got it from a book club, and it was a big hit with all my friends. Everybody was reading that book. It is a story of Tom, who is a pupil at a sort of prestigious but also kind of rundown private school in England. And he's not really looking forward to going back to school, but he's looking forward to seeing his friends Susan and Miles again. And little do they know that they have a new biology teacher this semester. And this biology teacher is not just any old professor. No, it's Count Dracula. And so you have all the horror tropes of, you know, steaks and garlic and holy water and soil from the home country, and the kids have to fight Count Dracula and save their school. And it's a horror book for kids. It's not very scary, but it has like all the tropes that goes into a classic vampire book. And in that sense, I'm saying that this is the first horror book that I read. Along with that book, I also got this extremely weird book called Utrolig ikke sant, which translates into something like unbelievable, isn't it? And when I said I was an anxious child, I was not kidding. There is a bunch of weird stuff in this book, which this book is meant for like middle grade kids, maybe like 10 to 12 years old. And it is a strange mix of, there's a bunch of true crime cases in here, a bunch of cryptozoology cases like the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot. And there is one article about Nostradamus, which scared the hell out of me. Like, scared me so much that I ripped out the page and just erased the article from the content listing. See, this is where Nostradamus was supposed to be. Yeah, ripped it out. There was also an article about the most dangerous animal on the planet, which turned out to be the common housefly, which could spread like 33 different diseases. I think I ripped that part out as well. Next question is, what is the movie that made you a horror fan? And it is, no surprises there, this came out at the exact right time. I was a teenager when Scream came out. I was just the right age for this kind of teeny slasher thing. And after this, Scream just kind of opened the floodgates for me in terms of horror. Like, after I saw Scream, I would watch just about anything in the horror section at the video store. Like anything, like Wishmaster, Phantoms. Does anyone remember that movie? It was based on a Dean Koontz book. For some reason that sticks in my mind. The cover sticks in my mind, but I can't remember anything about the movie. But yeah, I would look up horror movies in like magazines and books, and all of a sudden I was obsessed with horror movies. And it's all down to Wes Craven's Scream. Next question is, what is the book that made you a horror fan? Yeah, I had to double check, but yes, that is the question. And for me, that is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. And I got this book when I was staying in California in the early 2000s. Back then, I wasn't really reading horror. I was watching a bunch of horror movies. I would go to these midnight pre-premieres here in Bad again all by myself. I remember watching things like Final Destination and the Resident Evil movie. I have a real soft spot for the Resident Evil movie. But I wasn't really reading horror, but I was heavily into vampires, mostly due to Buffy the Vampire Slayer on TV. And I think that was the reason I picked this one up. I think I got this in, is it Powell City of Books in Portland, Oregon? I think so. Siri, look up Powell City of Books. This is a fairly slim volume, but it's highly impactful. It's beautifully written. It has influenced generations of horror writers ever since. If you have never read I Am Legend by Richard Matheson and you are a vampire fan, I highly recommend you check it out. If you are not a vampire fan, I highly recommend you check it out because it is a beautiful book. It's really scary. It's really good. Read it. Now, what is your favorite horror movie of all time? And I had to think about this one quite a bit because I haven't really had like a favorite horror movie, like one that I keep going back to. But then I thought about it a little bit more and I found out it has to be 28 Days Later. Now, I'm not really that much of a zombie fan. If you ask Danny Boyle, who directed this movie, he will say that this isn't a zombie movie. He will also say that it isn't a horror movie. Yeah. Because technically, the bad guys in this one aren't zombies, they're infected. Well, technically, the bad guys in this movie aren't infected, they're someone else entirely, but you'll have to watch the movie to find that out. This movie is a fast-paced, exciting, and inventive horror movie, but it's also filled with emotion and heart. It is incredibly sad. It is really disturbing. It's really funny in places, and it has an amazing soundtrack. This movie came out in 2002. I saw it in California in 2003, which is when it was released in the US. And I also met Naomi Harris, who plays one of the leads. I met her at the San Diego Comic-Con that same year. As a matter of fact, this is one of my most prized possessions, which I keep in a cardboard tube at the back of my closet for some reason. Actually, no, I know the reason. It's because I have absolutely no wall space because it's all bookshelves. This is a 28 Days Later movie poster, which Naomi signed. It says to Lisa right there. I don't know if you can make it out. It is also signed by Alex Garland, who wrote the movie, and Danny Boyle, who directed it. Danny Boyle, who also directed one of my other all-time favorite movies, Shallow Grave, which is, that's definitely not a horror movie, but man, is it scary. Bottom line, if you've never seen 28 Days Later, I highly recommend it. Whether you like zombies or not, whether you prefer to call them infected or not, watch it. Next up, what is your favorite horror trope? And for me, this is, hands down, the final girl. A lot has been said about the final girl throughout the past 4 decades. Not everyone thinks that the final girl is a positive trope. You can discuss that whichever way you want. I happen to see it as a very positive thing. I see it as an empowering role for women. And let's face it, the final girl is just badass. Sydney Prescott is my queen. On the podcast Books in the Freezer, Stephanie asks her guests at the end of the episode what their final girl song would be, like the song that would be playing at the end of the horror movie when the credits start to roll. And because I know that I will never be a guest on the Books in the Freezer podcast, I decided I would like to add my final girl song right here and right now. I have two. It all depends on the mood of the movie. If you want like a kick-ass, like end on a high note type feel, I'm going for If You Want Blood, You Got It by AC/DC. But if the end of my horror movie is more of a downer, like who knows what's gonna happen next, I'm just sitting on the front step, just looking at the world burning, taking a swig of my tequila before I pick up my machete and I go on my way. It's going to be Season of the Witch by Karen Elson. We have come to the final question, and that is, why do you love horror? And That is a very good question. I mean, I've already established that I am a very anxious person, and maybe that is the key to why I love horror so much. Horror is fear that you can turn on and off. You can turn off the movie, you can close the book, and I guess that a person like me who's really anxious, really fearful, puts me in control a little bit. Honestly, I probably couldn't say without having a psychologist do some real deep dive therapy on me, but that is my take on it anyway. Horror is fear that you can turn off when you feel like it. All right, that was my take on the horror life tag. I would love to hear what your relationship with horror is. If you are a YouTuber, then feel free to use the tag yourself. I will leave all the prompts in the video description. If you're not a YouTuber, please talk about your relationship with horror in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Happy Halloween. Hope to see you next time.